Hi everyone and welcome to another one of our 6th grade videos. Today we're going to be focusing on just the tail end of topic 13 and looking at next week's content. Again, like we always do, we want to start with looking at our pacing guide. And obviously we have a short week this week, and you can see the video we put out last week to look at the content that's covered this week in class for the beginning of topic 13. Next week you also have a short week, again a 4-day week, and you'll be covering the rest of topic 13. So let's take a look at your the blueprint correlation guide that we've looked at before. Um, Here we go. And again, we're focusing mainly in number sense 1.4, calculating given percents of quantities and solve problems involving discounts of sales, interest earned, and tips. And remember last week we talked about how the first part of topic 13 is a lot of review from 5th grade. Not something you want to skip over and ignore, but something that you could have maybe compacted a little bit, or maybe you did the pre-test to see where your students are at, to see what they know and don't know regarding percents. So hopefully you were able to do that, make some determinations about how best to move along in this topic with your class. I'm going to talk just briefly about the rest of the topic today and give you some suggestions about the assessment at the end, and then we'll be all done. So today's going to be a short one. So let's go back to our book, and if remember, we always want to start with the math background for teachers. Last week we talked about the meaning of percents. Again, also refer back to the big idea, which is ratio. When mathematical or real-world quantities have a relationship that can be stated as for every x units of the first quantity, there are y units of the second quantity. This relationship can be described as a ratio. And then each one of those big ideas relates, each one of the essential understandings relates back to the big idea. And you can see that this week we're actually getting into 13.4, 13.5, and 13.6, and we're talking about proportionality. Here it talks about proportionality, that it involves a relationship in which the ratio of two quantities remains constant as the corresponding values of the quantities change. So when you're looking at solving percent of a number, or you're looking at tax and tip, we're going to be using proportionality and this idea of proportionality to help our students move along. And again, like I mentioned in last week's video, the nice thing about this is that from topics 11 and topic 12 and now in topic 13, you've seen this nice progression where you've gone through ratios, you've talked about proportions, and now you're getting into percents and being able to look at percent as a ratio, and then being able to find the percent of a number by using a proportion. So one thing you want to definitely do with your students is hit home that connection that students are seeing in those topics. Again, I've said this before, but not looking at them as discrete individual topics or discrete individual lessons, but seeing and allowing your students to see the connection between those different topics in math. So the math background for teachers, second page, we want to kind of look over here. This is what you're going to be working with this week. Using percents talks over here about using percent in taxes and tips. You definitely want to look at that and also do the review right here, the teaching tip, review decimal place value with students to guide them to identify how to multiply percents with decimals. And then the thing you're probably going to be focusing on for a majority of your week this week is using a proportion to solve something like the percent of a number. So a good idea to take a look at this, give you a really good example of using proportion to solve problems involving percent. Now let's take a look at 13.5 and 13.6. 13.5, one thing I would talk about with your students and go over is what they have over here in this math background for teachers, is talking about percent problems being divided into 3 different categories. One where you have find a part, so you're given a percent and the whole. For example, here, what is 40% of 75? Finding a percent, you're given the whole and a part. What percent of 50 is 20? And then finding the whole, given a percent and a part, so like 35% of what number is 70. So Envision gives obviously several examples of these different types of percent problems. You want to kind of maybe introduce that to your students ahead of time when you're doing your interactive learning, or right before you start the visual learning bridge, just to talk about different ways in which they might see problems presented with percents. One thing that you want to pay attention to and I think it's really important. I think you'll have the time to do this. And again, you'll have to look at your pacing and make some determinations. If you had some time that you were able to buy from last week because you didn't need to spend every single day on each lesson, or you were able to compact some lessons and you have some extra time next week, what you might want to do is go ahead and spend an extra day on lesson 5. You may want to take an entire day and focus in on the interactive learning and really talk about finding percent of a number, and giving students a lot of opportunities to work with finding percent of a number. You may take a day and teach the lesson. You do the interactive learning, teach the lesson, and then spend the next day giving students the opportunity, maybe in groups or in pairs, to solve problems involving percent and using a proportion. It would just give them that extra opportunity and extra ability to solve some of those problems. You may want to look at, for example, some of the problems on page 320, if we can get there. 320, some of these problem solving questions down here, you may want to split students into groups or into pairs and use some of those problems and allow students to spend some time on those problems and really dig deep in finding the answers to those problems. And then you could also create it where if you have students working on those problems, they could come up with their answer. You could even have them write out their explanation of how they found the answer, and then you could even have a conversation in the class. And again, that's if you're going to have the time, if you're able to buy yourself some time this week, maybe by compacting some lessons and also looking at your pacing. You have an extra few days for this topic, so you may want to use that in 13.5 to really dig deep and solve some more complex problems and take some more time in the problem solving area with your students. If we take a look at lesson 6, again, you're taking this idea of finding percent of a number, everything you've been doing in 13.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, or sorry, 13.1 through 13.5, and now you're applying that to an everyday real life situation, working with tax and tip and how those relate to percent. A really good idea would be spend some time in the interactive learning here where you're looking at some multi-step problems. Allow students to really work together in groups or in pairs to solve those problems. I also encourage you to spend some time during this part of the lesson to allow students to talk either across groups or a whole class about how they found their answer, what steps they took, and also you may want to find some students that maybe didn't follow the path correctly and didn't do the problem in the correct order, and maybe they got an answer that was incorrect, and use that as an example of how, you know, not following the correct steps in this way can give them the wrong answer. So lots of things you can do in this lesson to just extend the learning, enhance the learning. One of the things I wanted to just point out that you may want to do on this topic, and some people do this a lot and others are maybe a little hesitant to try it, but something you might want to try with your topic test. Generally people will give the topic test form A or form B, and these are a good quick test to kind of give you an indication of what your students know and don't know. Something that you may want to try is the alternate assessment, or maybe a portion of the alternate assessment. Now, Envision in every topic gives you a free response test for students. This might be an opportunity or a time you want to try this out, or maybe a portion of it out. Maybe you want to combine a little bit of the form A, the multiple choice, and a little bit of the free response. The thing that the free response does is it gives you an opportunity to kind of look a little deeper into what the student's thinking and how they're solving problems, because they're asked to not just pick A, B, C, or D, but they're asked to actually solve the problem. And you know, obviously to solve the problem, in most cases they're going to have to show some work. And you can use that as a tool to see where your students are maybe having some misconceptions, where they're not understanding something correctly, and then you can use that as a tool to go back and work with them and do some intervention to clean up maybe some misconceptions. So you know, this might be a good opportunity to do one of two things: is to either give the free response all by itself. You may not be comfortable with that because it's asking a lot of students if they haven't experienced these kind of problems before, this length of a problem before. The other thing you could do is take a little bit of topic or the Form A test, a couple of the multiple choice, and then some of the free response, and mix those together to create one test. One thing I really like is this question 31 here. If you look, it's I like it because of what it asks the students to actually do. Let me see if I can pull this up here and jump to the next page. So 31 is asking, says Nate bought the following items at the store. If he received a discount of 15% off each item and then paid a sales tax of 7.5%, what was his total bill? Explain how you found the total amount. And I like that last part because not only is a student asked to do the calculations, but then they're asked to actually explain how they found the total amount. And that's going to give you, I think, some insight into your students' thinking and how they're processing finding percent of a number and using tax and tip and these different concepts that are learning in topic 13. So again, if you're comfortable and you feel like this is something you can do, even if you just took a few of these questions and gave them to your students as their assessment, it could be a really good opportunity for you to just push your students a little bit further and see what they know on a test where they're not given the multiple choice. So want to thank you guys for your time. I know that this was a brief video today, just not as long as our other videos, but again, if you guys have any questions or comments or suggestions that we can make this better, or something that you're not seeing on here that you'd like to see, please let us know. We want to make these a resource that is good for you and available to help you in any way that we can. So please, any questions or comments or suggestions, please contact us. Thanks a lot.